Do we have our guest here today, Jesse Marquez? How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Thank you for this opportunity.
You might
to
want
meet
to
with
bring
you.
that microphone a little closer to you. It does require you to be close to it, so you can move it along with you, and take it home with you if you want to. No, you don't want to do that. So anyway, we're here, interestingly enough, to talk about the port of LA, what's going on here in Portugal, and some of the findings that you've made in all of this removing of tenants. We talked briefly yesterday about this, and I think you have a good point that some of these tenants were removed unfairly, and I think that you want to tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. How I got involved in this situation was back in June of last year, 2017, where I attended a Port of LA Board of Harbor Commission meeting, and I was there to speak on different issues during the public comment period. But then there was 8, 9, 10 different ports of call tenants that were also attending the meeting. And each one got up to speak, and they were talking about how 2 days earlier they were all served a notice that they were being evicted in October, on October 2nd of 2017. And then each one got up and shared their story. I've been here 20 years, 30 years, two shops that actually have been here 50 years plus. And I'm right there sympathizing. Okay, what's going on there? And then they mentioned, well, we don't understand why we're being evicted. We were supposed to be part of phase 2, and then we're supposed to be brought back into the new facility. So I'm just sitting back thinking, well, what are the odds that the Port of LA might have done something illegal, behind the doors there and changing things? Now, so people understand that are listening my background and why I would have this type of an interest. In April of 2001, I founded a nonprofit organization called the Coalition for a Safe Environment. So we're an environmental justice organization that reviews Port of LA, Port of Long Beach projects. Now, when talking about projects, some of these projects are, $500 million, $600 million projects. So they're very big. In some cases, it might be, a brand new, a container terminal being built. In other cases, it might be the expansion of a terminal. In other cases, it might be just brand new projects that are coming on, like Alta Sea, for example. So our organization, we review those environmental documents. And we look at them through a little bit finer tooth comb, because I was born in San Pedro, raised in Wilmington all my life. And we discovered, when we started our organization, there were many members that had asthma, had lung disease, and other health problems that, they didn't understand where it came from. So having that kind of a background, I'm right here listening to them, and when the meeting was over, 2 or 3 walked up to me and said, Jesse, you've been a customer for ours, for 20, 30, 40 years, is there anything you could do to help look into this? And I says, okay, fine, I'll take a look at it. Now, to put it in perspective, we're talking about the Ports of Call Village and all the San Pedro waterfront, where back in 2009, the Port of LA approved a new project proposal. Now, when they approve a project, it's called an environmental impact report. And in that environmental impact report, they look at any type of environmental impact that the public would face. So it could be air quality, it could be water impacts, it could be land impacts, traffic congestion, public health, wildlife. So it covers the whole spectrum of things. But in 2009, the EIR, the Environmental Impact Report, was approved. And what I did is I went back to take a look at it, and lo and behold, it stated in there that all Ports of Call Village tenants would be relocated during the demolition and construction and then brought back into the new facility.
Now, this was when it was written back in 2009?
This is in 2009.
Okay.
So I says, okay, well, there's validity to what they're saying. Now, what can possibly change? Well, yes, you can change an environmental impact report, and I was familiar with 2 of those ways. Once you can do a supplemental document or a subsequent document. Well, what I found out is that there was a third type that's rarely used. And so that's why I was not familiar with it, called an addendum. Mm-hmm. And what happened in 2016, we're talking 7, 8 years later, the Port of LA had on the agenda to approve the new lease and permit to the developers in order to begin construction. Well, what they did was something very sneaky. No one from the public objected to a new Ports of Call Village or a new waterfront project. So naturally, no one's looking for anything that might be suspicious, that they might get upset about, that they would have to complain and raise hell all about. So what happened is that there were 3 attachments to the agenda, and they're called transmittals. Transmittal number 3 was an addendum to that 2009 EIR, eliminating the fact that they would be relocated during demolition and during construction, and even eliminating the fact that they would be coming back.
Now, we're talking about the same developers from way back in 2009?
Well, what happens, the project is approved in 2009, and then they go through a bidding process, a final selection process. But normally, projects begin within 2-3 years. And strangely, this one's beginning, 7, 8, 9 years later. Well, in the environmental review process, that is a red flag. Typically, as a standard, projects that are over 5 years then should be reviewed again to see, well, what has changed in the environment. Okay? Well, the reason they went with the addendum is because they were making these changes, and then they also changed the phases. So phase 2 was becoming phase 1, phase 1 was becoming phase 2. And what was happening at the board meetings, you had port officials and port staff like Michael Galvan saying, well, hey, we've been talking and telling everybody for over 2 years now. We've had 30, 40, 50 meetings and presentations discussing what the demolition schedule would be, that everyone would have to be eliminated. Well, what we're hearing is a situation whereby they're misleading the public. They're misleading the executive director and the Board of Harbor Commissioners by not telling the whole truth. They never stated to the Board of Harbor Commissioners and to the executive director and to the general public that they changed the EIR in 2019.
Who is it that you're talking about? Jericho Development and Ratkovic is the developers for the project, or who's misleading here?
Well, the port is misleading, and they've convinced the developers to also mislead, because even going back in 2016, there was a public meeting at the Grand Theater, and there you have one of the developers stating that, yes, people are going to be brought back into the new project, when they knew already at that point in time that was not the intent. Because of the work I do, where it's investigative, I'm researching, trying to find things that they're not doing, that's a requirement of the law on the environmental impact report, where they're misleading, where they're misrepresenting facts, and where they have intentionally left out information. So I am a Sherlock Holmes, and I'm one of the best that does this type of thing. So as I began to look into things, other surprising things happen. Here I'm looking at it from this little perspective, what's happening. And then what happened, one of our local community newspapers, the Random Lengths News, they did a full-page story about what was happening with the project. And what happens when something like that becomes public, members of the public read it. And then sometimes members of the public have information they want to share with you. See, because the key point was that they were going to not be brought back. But why would they not be back? These are tenants that are paying monthly rent. Why would you want to eliminate them? Well, other words were being used by the developers and by the port, that they also wanted to bring in new tenants. Well, there's nothing wrong with keeping old ones and bringing new ones, but they were using the words to diversify and bring in new, so they could attract new people that don't traditionally come to the Port Sacal Village. And then my name is Jesse Marquez, so in actuality, I'm a Latino, I'm Mexican American. So I also look at things sometimes from a ethnic perspective and ethnic minority perspective. Is there any little civil rights things now beginning to emerge here? And then the port announced that, they were going to be keeping certain businesses and eliminating the others. So the San Pedro Fish Market and Restaurant was going to be staying. They were not going to be asked to leave, and they were not going to be evicted. Well, when the Random Lengths newspaper story came out, a woman called up and didn't leave her name, but anonymously left a message. And it stated, by the way, I think you should look up Michael DiBernardo, who works for the Port of LA, because I think he's an owner in the San Pedro Fish Market and Restaurant. And I go, whoa. And so, I do the typical thing. You go on an internet search engine to see what you can find, on little surface levels. And there's a website called LinkedIn, which is a professional website, and only you as an individual can update and put information on your profile. Well, in its profile, He states that in October 2007, he became a co-owner of the San Pedro Fish Market. But then who is Michael DiBernardo at the Port of LA? He is like number 2 in the highest command ranking under the executive director. So now I'm saying, aha, is there some favoritism going on because here's the number 2 boss at the Port of LA. They're not going to want to eliminate his business or his business interests.
And this was in 2016?
This is in 2016.
Okay.
And actually, this was last year when the newspaper article came out.
Oh,
Okay.
with the Random Links
With the Random
article.
Links news.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I see that little thing where we have ethics violation. And you might think it's not a big deal being a part owner in a restaurant because it's not 100% owner. Well, the San Pedro Fish Market and Restaurant is a very unique restaurant in California. It does over $25 million a year. So like profit from that could easily be $1 million going to Michael DiBernardo. Okay, so that kind of emerged. And then I was getting ready to attend a meeting and a document was hand-delivered to me. And it was given to this person that delivered to me by another person, by another person. So we're talking now 3 generations who said, get it to Mr. Marquez. And what the letter was, it was a 10-page letter written by one of the developers who was not selected. And what happened had he called...
Wait, one of the developers that was not selected.
Yes.
Why is he involved if he was not selected?
Well, because he said that there were improprieties going on during the developer selection process. What happened is that 7 proposals came in. And one was the LA waterfront, which was the Johnson, the Jericho Development, and Rain Ratkovich Company. So they ended up being the winner. Well, he was one of the other 6 who did not get picked. And then he contacted the city attorney at that time, Carmen Trutanich, saying, I want to meet with you because there's just too many improprieties going here that, these guys are not qualified. In fact, they were the least qualified. Not only that they had 2 things in their proposal that should have disqualified them right from the get-go. And not only that, they claimed in their application they knew each other for 20 years and had a 20 years business relationship. They had only met like 2-3 weeks before the deadline. So anyway, at that meeting, the city attorney tells them, well, put all this in writing and come back. That way it gives us something to investigate. So what happens, and this letter is dated March 18th, 2013. So it's a 10-page letter giving the dates, times, facts, and figures showing that the Port of LA and its staff was manipulating the selection process of the developer.
Well, one of the developers was a Dallas-based company. Is that who we're talking about here? That had the letter delivered to you, the Trammell Crow company?
No, it was McGladden Glenn.
Okay.
I think is the name of it. I have to double check on that. So they were the ones that prepared this letter, and so I'm checking information, and I can't find any follow-up by the city's attorneys to investigate these claims. Then in December, during the holidays, someone mentioned to me, well, Jesse, by the way, wasn't it an election year? Wasn't Carmen Trutanich running for county district attorney, and Councilman Joe Buscano was running for office, Eric Garcetti was running for office? Why don't you take a look at the campaign statements? And then another thing emerged, because 10 days after that letter is filed, donations are being received by the city attorney who's running for district attorney. The councilman is receiving donations, and the mayor is receiving donations from the developers and developers' family.
So you're saying donations from Ratkovic and
well, it turns out Ratkovich, I did not find any donations from him and his family, although it could have been. It was the Johnson family that stood out. Because when you donate money to a campaign, you must disclose a few facts and the information. If you're employed, who's your employer? If you're unemployed and you're a housewife, you put housewife. If you're a student, you put student. Well, what showed up was a student donating the maximum of $1,300 named Johnson. Another student donating $1,300 named Johnson. Cousin Johnson, a student donating $1,300. Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Ungaro of the San Pedro Fish Market. So then I've uncovered that now. So
Jesse, I'm going to have to cut it short a little bit here. You definitely have a lot of information. Can you show us What is it? How many pages on there?
So what happened as a result of doing all this investigative work, we put together a document. Every member of the public has a right to request information from a government agency, to report an incident, and to request an investigation. But by and large, they don't have enough documentation. So what I did is I put together a 69-page document. It was delivered to 14 different government agencies, asking them, and it says a request for criminal complaint and a request for investigation, where I include a chronology from 2009 all the way up to the date, showing what happened, who, what, when, and where. I also went so far as to then identify what did they violate. Well, the other ugly head that popped up is that 18 of those businesses that got evicted on the October date were all ethnic minority-owned businesses. So we're talking Mexican-American businesses, Puerto Rican business, Korean business, Iranian-owned business, Afghanistan business, Indian, all minority ethnic businesses. So that is a category of civil rights violations. Now, when we look at the environmental, we have state CEQA and we have federal NEPA. They violated sections of the law there. And then in the business world, in California and all states, you have business codes that apply to you, such as fraud, misrepresentation, concealment. Well, those would apply to the port also. So in this 69-page letter, we have identified 41 legal authorities that they have violated.
So I guess the question would be, now that we're in this position, you've identified these infractions, for lack of a better word. I mean, what's the goal now? I mean, the buildings have already been torn down. The development's on track. What is it that you're seeking at this point?
Okay, well, some government agencies, like
2 minutes to answer that.
Like the state attorney general, can take legal action. You did fraud. You've misrepresented. You sold a lemon type thing law. And so what this does is that in those cases, some agencies have a legal authority to come in and enforce and prosecute them for doing it. In the other cases that we're asking for administrative remedies. So like, for example, the US EPA, which represents the federal end of it, they can come and meet with the Port of LA. You did violate the law. The only reason you got away with it because the statute of limitations passed in 2016 and no one challenged it, but you still violated the law. So now we want you to prepare a proposal as to what policies, procedures are you going to now initiate it to prevent the circumvention of having a supplemental EIR where you have a public notice, a public meeting, you receive public comment, and it gets distributed between all the different government agencies who have an interest and a responsibility.
Jesse, I guess we're going to have to bring you back in again. Huh? 15 minutes probably wasn't enough. Actually, 20 minutes now. But we do have to, unfortunately, move on to our next segment. Thank you for being here. Definitely an eye-opening, for me anyway. So we'll definitely bring you back.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity.
Okay, we're going to go on break right now, and we'll be right back.